Imagine a 4-year-old sitting at a table, staring at a single marshmallow. A researcher tells her, "Wait 15 minutes without eating it, and you'll get 2." The child squirms, covers her eyes, fidgets with her hair. Some children grab the marshmallow immediately. Others last a few minutes before surrendering. A rare few manage to wait, earning their reward. For decades, psychologists pointed to this famous Stanford experiment as proof that willpower determines life outcomes, that those who delay gratification become successful adults while the impulsive ones struggle. But what if we've been asking the wrong question all along? What if the real test isn't whether you can resist the marshmallow, but whether you understand why your brain is screaming at you to eat it right now? What if poverty isn't a failure of character, but a collision between ancient neurobiology and modern economics, between a brain designed for scarcity and a world engineered to exploit that design? Your brain doesn't want you to be poor. It also doesn't want you to be rich. For most of human existence, your brain wanted exactly one thing: to keep you alive until tomorrow. That required calories today, safety tonight, immediate responses to immediate threats. For roughly 200,000 years, humans lived in small bands, hunting and gathering across landscapes where abundance was temporary and winter was always coming. The brain that emerged from this crucible is a masterpiece of short-term survival engineering. When our ancestors found honey in a tree, the neurologically correct response wasn't to save some for next week. It was to consume as much as possible right now, because tomorrow that resource might be gone, claimed by another band, or swarming with bees you couldn't safely approach again. The dopamine system that floods your brain with pleasure when you acquire something sweet, fatty, or rare wasn't a design flaw. It was a survival feature. It kept us alive in a world where the future was desperately uncertain and the present was everything. This reward circuitry operates through a chemical messenger called dopamine, released in a part of the brain called the ventral striatum whenever we encounter something our ancestors needed to survive: food, social connection, novel information, anything that promised immediate advantage. The surge of dopamine doesn't just feel good. It focuses attention, sharpens memory, and motivates action. It tells your brain this matters, remember this, do it again. In an environment of genuine scarcity, this system worked beautifully. The problem is that we no longer live in that environment, but we still carry that brain. We've moved from scarcity to abundance in less than 10 generations, an evolutionary eye blink. Our neural architecture hasn't caught up. We're running ancient software on modern hardware, or perhaps more accurately, we're running ancient hardware in a modern landscape it was never designed to navigate. Psychologists call this temporal discounting, the tendency to value immediate rewards more than future ones. If I offer you $100 today or $150 in a year, most people take the 100 now, even though waiting represents a 50% return that no legitimate investment could match. This isn't irrational if you're living in 50,000 BCE, when a year from now you might be dead, or the person making the promise might be gone, or the resource might have lost its value. Immediate consumption made sense. But this same mental machinery creates havoc in a modern economy built on credit, investment, and compound returns over decades. The neural circuitry that kept your ancestors alive now keeps you poor. The battle plays out between two systems in your brain. Neuroscientist Daniel Kahneman called them System 1 and System 2, though they map roughly onto older brain structures and newer ones. System 1 is fast, automatic, emotional, operating largely in the limbic system and the striatum, the older parts of the brain we share with many other mammals. System 1 sees a sales sign and feels urgency. It processes limited time offer as a survival threat. It experiences the dopamine hit of a purchase as a genuine reward, equivalent to finding food. System 2 is slow, deliberate, analytical, centered in the prefrontal cortex, the newest part of the brain in evolutionary terms, the part that makes humans unusual among primates. System 2 can calculate compound interest, weigh opportunity costs, imagine your future self in retirement. But System 2 is expensive to run. It requires glucose, attention, and cognitive effort. System 1 is always on, always fast, always emotionally compelling. In a fair fight, System 2 loses. This wouldn't matter if we lived in a neutral economic environment, one that didn't systematically exploit this neural architecture. But we don't. Consider what saving for winter meant for most of human history. Even in agricultural societies, the planting horizon was seasonal. You stored grain after harvest to last until spring planting. 6 months, maybe a year in a good climate with good storage. The idea of saving for something 30 years away, like retirement, would have been incomprehensible to your ancestors, not because they were stupid, but because they lived in a world where 30-year planning horizons were impossible. Most people didn't live 30 years. Resources didn't last 30 years. Social structures changed too rapidly to make such plans meaningful. Your brain evolved to optimize across days, weeks, maybe months. We now ask it to optimize across decades in systems like retirement accounts and mortgage payments and education savings. We're asking the brain to do something it was never designed to do, and then we call it a moral failing when it struggles. The modern twist makes this exponentially worse. We no longer live in actual scarcity, at least not most of us in developed economies. We live in manufactured scarcity layered over abundance. Marketing has become sophisticated enough to trigger those ancient scarcity responses in an environment of unprecedented plenty. The only two left in stock, warning on a website, isn't reporting a fact about supply chains. It's pushing the exact button that made your ancestors grab honey when they found it. The countdown timer on a sale isn't telling you something meaningful about value. It's activating the same neural pathway that fired when you spotted prey and had seconds to decide whether to pursue. Flash sales, limited editions, seasonal releases, exclusive drops. All of this is scarcity theater designed to overwhelm your prefrontal cortex with limbic urgency. A $5 coffee doesn't feel expensive because it's less than the hourly wage for many people, making it trivial. But that same person will agonize over a $200 investment in an index fund, even though the investment is objectively more valuable. The coffee triggers immediate sensory pleasure, dopamine now. The investment is abstract, distant, uncertain, activating System 2, which has to fight against System 1's indifference to far future rewards. This explains something economists long found puzzling. Why do poor communities spend disproportionately on lottery tickets? The standard answer was ignorance or irrationality. But look at it through the lens of temporal discounting and opportunity. If you're living paycheck to paycheck, the difference between saving $10 a week and having nothing is almost meaningless. Either way, you're not retiring comfortably. Either way, you're not buying a house. Either way, one major medical emergency destroys you. The lottery, for all its terrible odds, offers the only imaginable path to a life-changing amount of money. It's not irrational. It's tragically rational given the constraints. Your brain does the math. Incremental saving cannot bridge this gap in my lifetime. But this ticket, however unlikely, represents a possibility that no amount of conventional saving does. The brain chooses the lottery. But evolution isn't the only culprit. What happens when entire economic systems are designed to exploit this wiring? In the 1970s, something fundamental shifted in how Western economies operated. For much of the 20th century, consumer credit was relatively limited, reserved for major purchases like homes and cars, granted after significant scrutiny. The average American family had little to no credit card debt because credit cards barely existed. Banks were local, conservative, relationship-based. Then came financial deregulation, computer databases that could assess risk across millions of customers, and the securitization of debt that let banks sell off their loans, removing the incentive to ensure borrowers could repay. Suddenly, credit cards flooded American mailboxes, pre-approved offers, low introductory rates, minimum payments that covered barely more than interest. The democratization of credit, they called it. Access to capital for everyone. What it actually was, from a neurological perspective, was the largest-scale experiment in exploiting temporal discounting ever attempted. Credit cards do something extraordinary to the human brain. They separate the pleasure of purchase from the pain of payment, and they do it with precision. When you pay cash, your insula activates, a brain region associated with pain and disgust. Spending cash hurts a little. That pain creates natural friction, a pause, a moment where System 2 might intervene. Credit cards eliminate that pause. The purchase feels free. The dopamine reward is immediate and full. The bill arrives weeks later, abstract, disconnected from what you bought, easy to minimize with a payment that feels manageable even as interest compounds. Credit card companies discovered they could engineer their systems to maximize this disconnect. The minimum payment psychology is deliberate. By allowing people to pay just a tiny percentage, often 2 or 3% of the balance, companies keep accounts active and compounding while making the pain of payment feel negligible. A $1,000 balance requires a $25 minimum payment. That feels manageable. The fact that you'll pay $3,000 over a decade to clear it isn't visible in the moment. System 1 handles the minimum payment. System 2 would need a spreadsheet and time to calculate the real cost. Most people never run that calculation. Payday loans push this exploitation even further. Interest rates that would have been illegal usury a generation ago, sometimes exceeding 400% annually, targeting people in immediate need. The person taking a payday loan isn't stupid. They're desperate, facing eviction or repossession or disconnected utilities, and their brain is in pure survival mode. System 1 is completely in control because System 1's job is immediate survival, and it will sacrifice the future without hesitation to secure the present. The payday loan industry exists because of temporal discounting. It's a business model built on harvesting the difference between immediate relief and long-term cost. For comparison, consider Islamic finance, which prohibits riba, the charging of interest. This isn't primitive thinking. It's a different philosophical framework about the nature of money and fairness. Islamic banking structures investments as partnerships, where the bank shares in risk and profit rather than extracting guaranteed interest regardless of outcome. Whether this system works better economically is debatable and context-dependent, but the underlying principle recognizes something important: that debt with compounding interest can become a trap, that it creates obligations the borrower may never escape, that it turns money itself into a commodity rather than a medium of exchange. Western finance abandoned these restrictions centuries ago, and credit became the engine of economic growth. It also became the engine of wealth extraction from those least able to escape it. The engineering goes deeper than debt. Modern consumer culture has become remarkably sophisticated at manufacturing desire, at creating wanting where none existed. Variable reward schedules, the psychology behind slot machines, now structure everything from social media feeds to online shopping. You don't know what you'll see when you refresh Instagram, what deal you'll find when you check that shopping app, what notification might be waiting. This unpredictability is neurologically powerful. Research on dopamine shows that the neurotransmitter spikes highest not when you get a reward, but when you anticipate a possible reward. Uncertainty amplifies the response. Slot machines hook people not because they always pay out, but because they might pay out, and that uncertainty keeps dopamine flowing, keeps attention locked, keeps fingers pulling the lever. Your phone delivers variable rewards all day long. So does e-commerce. The flash sale that might appear, the item that might come back in stock, the limited edition that might drop. Each uncertainty spike keeps you engaged, keeps you checking, keeps you primed to spend. Scarcity tactics prey on the same wiring. The only two left, warning activates loss aversion, another deeply rooted bias. Humans feel the pain of loss roughly twice as strongly as the pleasure of equivalent gain. Losing $20 hurts more than finding $20 feels good. This made evolutionary sense when resources were genuinely scarce, and losing your food cache could mean starvation. It makes less sense when the scarcity is artificial, when the website is lying, or when limited edition is a marketing category that will be repeated next season. But your amygdala doesn't know that. It processes scarcity warnings as genuine threats, as opportunities about to vanish, and it pushes System 1 into urgency mode. The countdown timer isn't giving you useful information. It's hacking your threat detection circuitry. Social proof has been weaponized similarly. Keeping up with the Joneses is an old phenomenon, but social media has turned it into a panopticon of comparison. You don't just see your neighbor's car. You see curated highlight reels of hundreds of acquaintances, influencers, and strangers, all displaying consumption as identity, all triggering status anxiety. Thorstein Veblen wrote about conspicuous consumption more than a century ago. The idea that the wealthy consume luxuries not primarily for use value, but for signaling, for demonstrating status. What's changed is scale and visibility. Everyone is now performing consumption for an audience, even if they can't afford it, especially if they can't afford it, because the performance is increasingly what matters. Your brain processes this as a dominance hierarchy, which it is, and dominance hierarchies trigger deep mammalian circuitry about position, belonging, and worth. Buying the right thing becomes about much more than the thing itself. It becomes about identity, community, status. Companies know this. They sell the identity, not the product. The subscription economy represents perhaps the purest expression of friction asymmetry. It's easy to subscribe. One click, maybe entering payment information once. It's deliberately difficult to cancel. Hidden in settings, requiring phone calls, confirmation emails, waiting periods. Are you sure screens that list everything you'll miss? This is an accident. It's designed friction, making the activation of spending effortless while making the termination of spending labor-intensive. The subscription might be $10 a month, barely noticeable on a statement, but across a dozen services, it's $120, $1,400 annually, accumulating like sediment. The companies count on inertia, on the fact that System 2 requires effort to activate. And canceling a subscription requires System 2 noticing the charge, remembering the service exists, and investing time to cancel it. Most subscriptions go uncanceled for months or years after their utility ends. This is revenue built on cognitive burden. French philosopher Jean Baudrillard argued that we've entered a society of consumption where objects no longer have primarily use value but sign value, where what you buy signals who you are, and consumption becomes a language of identity. This transforms the entire nature of the economy. You're not buying a phone. You're buying membership in a cultural tribe. You're not buying shoes. You're buying a story about who you are and who you might become. Marketing has always understood this at some level, but neuroscience and data analytics have refined it into precision targeting. The ad you see is not the ad someone else sees, even for the same product. It's customized to push your particular buttons based on your browsing history, purchase patterns, demographic profile, even your emotional state inferred from typing speed and time of day. Compare this to the cultural relationship with consumption in other contexts. German and Scandinavian cultures maintain much higher savings rates than Americans, not because their brains are different, but because the cultural narrative around money emphasizes security, collective welfare, and long-term stability over individual consumption as identity. A middle-class German family might drive an older car and vacation modestly while maintaining substantial savings. An equivalent American family might finance a new SUV and book vacations on credit. Neither is objectively correct, but they reflect different cultural values about what money means and what constitutes a good life. East Asian cultures add another dimension, where shame operates differently than Western guilt. Guilt is individual and internal. Shame is social and relational. In cultures where shame operates strongly, financial failure affects not just you but your family's honor, creating different incentives around risk and saving. Collectivist societies often pool family wealth across generations, with successful members expected to support extended family. This creates both security and obligation, a financial network that Western individualism largely abandoned. The bootstrap mythology, the idea that anyone can make it alone through sheer effort, is particularly American, and it leaves individuals bearing risk that other cultures distribute across kinship networks. Buddhist economics, as articulated by E.F. Schumacher, questions the entire premise of maximization that drives Western economic thought. Standard economics says more consumption is better, that GDP growth is the goal, that standard of living measured in material terms is what matters. Buddhist economics asks about quality of life, about right livelihood, about whether increasing consumption actually increases well-being beyond a certain threshold. The hedonic treadmill research suggests it doesn't. People adapt to their material circumstances remarkably quickly, returning to baseline happiness levels whether they get richer or poorer, as long as basic needs are met. This means the chase for more, the consumption that credit enables, may not deliver the satisfaction it promises. But your dopamine system doesn't know that. It evolved to make you chase resources, not to make you happy once you have them. So we have Stone Age brains navigating Space Age financial traps. But here's the twist. Even knowing this doesn't automatically fix it. Why? Because poverty itself impairs the very cognitive functions you need to escape it. This is perhaps the cruelest dimension of the trap. Researchers Sindel Mullainathan and Eldar Schaffer conducted studies showing that financial scarcity literally reduces cognitive capacity. They tested farmers in India before and after harvest, the same individuals, performing identical cognitive tests. After harvest, when money wasn't scarce, the farmers scored significantly higher. Before harvest, during financial stress, their effective IQ dropped by roughly 13 points. 13 points is the difference between normal cognitive function and classifications that would require special services. The scarcity wasn't just stressful. It was consuming mental bandwidth, creating what they called tunneling, where immediate concerns crowd out everything else. When you're worried about making rent, your brain allocates resources to that immediate threat, leaving less capacity for long-term planning, abstract thinking, or complex problem solving. This creates a vicious spiral. The people who most need to make careful long-term financial decisions are the ones operating under conditions that make such decisions neurologically harder. It's not that poor people are bad at planning. It's that poverty creates cognitive load that makes everyone worse at planning. Put a wealthy person under the same scarcity conditions, and their decision-making degrades similarly. Poverty isn't a character flaw. It's a context that degrades character, or at least degrades the cognitive resources needed to exercise traits like patience and foresight. Decision fatigue compounds this. Psychologist Roy Baumeister's research on willpower suggests it operates like a muscle, depleting with use. Every decision you make, especially decisions requiring self-control, drains a limited resource. By evening, you have less willpower than morning. This is why people with difficult jobs often eat poorly at night. They've spent their willpower budget at work. Now consider the decision burden of poverty. Which bus route saves 50 cents but takes 40 minutes longer? And do you have 40 minutes? And is 50 cents worth your time? And if you're late, will you get fired? And if you walk instead, can you skip lunch to save that money? Poor families face dozens of these calculations daily, small financial optimizations that wealthier families never consider because the amounts aren't material to them. Each decision depletes willpower. By the time you're deciding whether to buy the healthy food or a cheap food, whether to save $20 or spend it on something that would bring immediate relief, you're operating on fumes. The bandwidth tax of poverty means you're making the most important decisions with the least cognitive resources. Then there are the structural barriers, the ways that poverty itself costs money. Overdraft fees punish people for not having money by taking more of their money. Banks charge monthly fees on accounts below minimum balances, extracting resources from those with the least. Interest rates on loans correlate inversely with wealth. The less money you have, the more expensive it is to borrow. Poor neighborhoods have fewer grocery stores and more convenience stores, creating food deserts where healthy food costs more and requires transportation the poor often lack. This is sometimes called the ghetto tax, the premium paid for being poor. Time poverty layers on top of financial poverty. Without a car, errands take hours. Without internet at home, job applications require library trips. Without childcare, bringing kids to appointments consumes time that could be spent working. Look at the historical context. The Protestant work ethic, the idea that prosperity reflects virtue and poverty reflects moral failing, provided convenient justification for inequality, but it doesn't match data. The post-World War II GI Bill created massive intergenerational wealth in America by providing education funding and home loans to returning soldiers, but it was administered in ways that systematically excluded Black veterans. Redlining, the practice of marking Black neighborhoods as too risky for lending, prevented wealth accumulation through homeownership, the primary mechanism of middle-class wealth building. The impact cascades across generations. Your grandparents couldn't buy a house because of their race. Your parents inherited no home equity. You start adulthood with no family wealth to draw on for education, business investment, or emergency funds. Meanwhile, families who benefited from those programs passed homes, stocks, and stability down through generations. The racial wealth gap is an ancient history. It's the compound interest of historical theft. Psychologically, this creates learned helplessness, a term psychologist Martin Seligman coined to describe what happens when organisms experience repeated situations where their actions don't affect outcomes. Dogs given inescapable electric shocks eventually stop trying to escape even when escape becomes possible. They've learned that effort doesn't matter. People in generational poverty often experience similar learned helplessness. You try to save, then a medical bill wipes it out. You get a raise, then rent increases. You pay down debt, then a car repair puts you back in the hole. After enough cycles, the brain learns that effort doesn't change outcomes, and it stops trying. This looks like laziness from outside, but it's a rational response to an environment where agency has been repeatedly punished. The what the hell effect describes another psychological pattern. Once you've broken a diet by eating one cookie, you eat the whole box. The first violation dissolves the constraint, and the brain figures you might as well indulge fully since you've already failed. This happens with money too. Overspend your budget by $20, and suddenly spending another 100 feels equivalent. You've already failed, so the marginal violation feels costless. Identity economics makes this self-perpetuating. If you see yourself as bad with money, that becomes a story your brain tells about who you are. Stories shape behavior. You act in ways consistent with your identity, even when that identity is destructive, because changing it requires not just changing behavior, but changing your fundamental narrative about yourself. That's cognitively expensive and emotionally threatening. It's easier to be consistently who you think you are, even if who you think you are keeps you trapped. This sounds bleak. But what if the solution isn't superhuman willpower? What if it's redesigning the choice architecture around us? Behavioral economics has shown that small environmental changes dramatically affect decisions without requiring any change in underlying willpower. Call these nudges, environmental design that makes the desired behavior easier than the undesired one. Automatic enrollment in retirement savings programs increases participation rates by 30 or 40 percentage points compared to opt-in systems, even though people could always choose to enroll manually. The only change is which option requires action. Making saving the default, the path of least resistance, means System 1's laziness works in your favor rather than against it. Automatic transfers from checking to savings on payday remove the decision entirely. The money disappears before you can spend it, before System 1 even registers it as available. Commitment devices formalize this. Ulysses contracts, named for Odysseus tying himself to the mast so he couldn't succumb to the siren's song. You restrict your future self's options while you're thinking clearly, knowing your future self will be tempted. Apps that lock savings until a target date. Christmas clubs that hold money until the holidays. Any mechanism that removes the option to defect from your plan. This isn't weakness. It's strategic use of your own psychology. Kenya's M-Pesa system, mobile money that allows people without bank accounts to save and transfer funds via phone, has increased savings rates in populations that were previously unbanked. The friction of getting to a physical bank was enough to prevent saving. Remove that friction, make saving as easy as sending a text, and behavior changes. Chile redesigned its pension system to make retirement contributions automatic and visible, increasing participation and making retirement security a default rather than a choice requiring financial sophistication. On the cognitive side, mental accounting can work for you if deployed consciously. Richard Thaler's research showed people mentally put money in different buckets: savings, rent, entertainment, even though money is fungible. Use this. Separate accounts for different purposes create psychological barriers to rating one bucket for another. The opportunity cost visualization makes abstract future value concrete. That $100 restaurant meal isn't just $100. At your hourly wage, it's 10 hours of your life, or the book you've wanted, or 3 weeks of coffee, or a month of your phone bill. Forcing yourself to translate money into time or alternate uses makes System 2 engage. The 10-10-10 rule asks how you'll feel about this decision in 10 minutes, 10 months, 10 years. Most impulse purchases feel good for about 10 minutes. In 10 months, you won't remember them. In 10 years, they're invisible. Saving feels painful for about 10 minutes. In 10 months, having a buffer feels secure. In 10 years, compound interest has multiplied it. The rule doesn't change your brain, but it activates different neural pathways, pulling future consequences into present consideration. Stoic philosophy taught similar techniques 2,000 years ago. Epictetus distinguished between what we control and what we don't. You can't control your impulses. You can control your environment. You can't control your dopamine system. You can control whether credit cards are in your wallet. Aristotle understood virtue as habit, not innate trait. Temperance isn't something you are. It's something you practice until it becomes automatic, until System 1 itself learns new patterns. Policy interventions matter enormously. Universal basic income experiments in Finland and Kenya show that reducing immediate financial stress improves decision-making, increases entrepreneurship, and doesn't reduce work effort as critics feared. Scarcity mindset is a response to actual scarcity. Remove the scarcity, and the mindset shifts. Financial literacy programs work better when framed as public health, not moral improvement. When they acknowledge the structural barriers and cognitive burdens rather than lecturing about personal responsibility. Japan's Kikibo budgeting tradition embeds tracking and reflection into daily life as cultural practice, not individual failure requiring correction. It's a system designed for human psychology rather than against it. Amartya Sen's capabilities approach to development focuses on freedom to achieve well-being, not just income or consumption. The question isn't how much you have, but what you can do with what you have, what opportunities are actually available, what constraints limit your choices. This reframing shifts analysis from individual decision-making to structural conditions that enable or prevent flourishing. It's not enough to say someone should save more. What are the barriers preventing them from saving? What would need to change to make saving realistic? This philosophical shift moves from blame to design, from willpower to architecture. But knowing the science, understanding the systems, that's not enough. The hardest part is the daily practice of choosing differently. Building wealth is fundamentally about changing your relationship with time. Philip Zimbardo's research on time perspective shows that people orient toward past, present, or future, and this orientation predicts life outcomes better than most other psychological variables. Future-oriented people save more, achieve more education, report more satisfaction. Present hedonistic people consume more, take more risks, struggle with addiction. The orientation isn't genetic. It's learned, shaped by culture and experience. If your experience taught you the future is uncertain and uncontrollable, present orientation is rational. Change the experience, and the orientation can shift. The compound interest often attributed to Einstein, calling it the eighth wonder of the world, illustrates why future orientation matters. Money saved early doesn't just add. It multiplies. $1,000 invested at age 20 becomes vastly more at retirement than the same 1,000 invested at 40, even though it's the same amount of money. Time is the ingredient that transforms saving into wealth. But you can't see time. You can't feel compound interest. Your dopamine system doesn't fire for abstract exponential curves. It fires for the thing you can buy today. The psychological shift from sacrifice to trade-off matters. Sacrifice implies loss, pain, something taken from you. It activates the same neural circuits as physical pain. Trade-off implies choice, exchange, getting something perhaps more valuable. The morning latte isn't a sacrifice. It's choosing immediate pleasure over future security. A trade you might make consciously sometimes and not other times, but a trade, not a deprivation. Framing matters. Your brain responds differently to "I'm sacrificing things I want" versus "I'm trading small pleasures for larger goals." One feels like suffering. The other feels like strategy. The hedonic treadmill explains why consumption doesn't produce lasting happiness. You adapt to new circumstances within months. The new car, the bigger house, the expensive clothes all return you to baseline emotional state faster than you expect. Psychologists Brickman and Campbell showed that lottery winners and paraplegics return to similar happiness levels within a year of their life changes. Humans are adaptation machines. This is depressing if your strategy for happiness is acquiring more things. It's liberating if you realize that less consumption doesn't mean less happiness. The minimalism movement, the financial independence retire early communities, these aren't about deprivation. They're about recognizing that beyond a certain point, stuff doesn't buy well-being, but time and freedom might. Seneca wrote 2,000 years ago that it's not the person with too little who is poor, but the person who craves more. Poverty is a relationship to desire, not just a quantity of resources. Identity transformation is perhaps the deepest shift. Carol Dweck's research on growth mindset shows that believing your abilities can develop, that you're not fixed, changes outcomes. Applied to money, this means your current relationship with money isn't permanent identity. It's learned behavior that can be unlearned. Dan McAdams's work on narrative identity shows we construct stories about who we are, and those stories guide behavior. If your story is, "I'm bad with money, I always have been, my family always was," that story is a prison. Changing the story requires rewriting the narrative. Not denying the past, but reinterpreting it. I haven't learned money skills yet. Instead of "I can't learn money skills." My family didn't have these opportunities. Instead of "I'm doomed to repeat my family's patterns." The story you tell shapes the choices you make. which shapes the outcomes you get, which reinforces the story. Break the story, and you break the loop. Community shapes financial behavior powerfully. You become like the people you spend time with, not because of conscious imitation, but because norms are social and brains are social. If everyone around you lives paycheck to paycheck, that's normal. If everyone around you saves 20%, that becomes normal. West African stockfuls, communal savings clubs where members contribute regularly and take turns receiving the pool, create both accountability and social structure around saving. Indigenous long-term thinking, like the Haudenosaunee seventh-generation principle, asking how decisions affect descendants 7 generations ahead, embeds future orientation into cultural identity. Japanese Madanai, the sense of regret over waste, makes consumption a moral question, not just an economic one. These cultural technologies work with human psychology rather than against it, using social connection and identity to drive behavior that individual willpower struggles to maintain. The paradox emerges clearly. Financial freedom comes from not being controlled by money, from reaching a point where money becomes a tool rather than a constraint. But getting there requires being disciplined about money, which can feel like being controlled by it. The resolution is an understanding that present discipline creates future freedom, that saying no to the purchase today is saying yes to choices tomorrow. Reframe from "I can't afford this" to "I'm choosing to use my resources differently." The first is deprivation. The second is agency. Same action, different story, different emotional valence, different effect on identity and motivation. The ultimate instant gratification, if you can train your brain to recognize it, is peace of mind. The absence of financial anxiety. The security of knowing you can handle emergencies. The freedom to make choices based on what you want rather than what you can afford. That satisfaction is deeper and more lasting than any purchase, but it's invisible. You can't photograph it. You can't display it. Your dopamine system doesn't spike for it. You have to learn to value it, consciously, repeatedly, until the valuing becomes automatic. True financial sovereignty isn't about getting rich. It's about reclaiming agency over a brain that was never designed for this world, in a system that profits from your autopilot. 3 layers have trapped us. Biology, the ancient reward circuits that optimize for short-term survival. Systems, the deliberate exploitation of those circuits by industries built on credit and consumption. Practice, the daily compound of small choices made under cognitive load and social pressure. Understanding all 3 is necessary. Biology isn't destiny, but you can't transcend it through willpower alone. Systems aren't neutral, but you can navigate them more consciously once you see how they're designed. Practice isn't easy, but it becomes easier when you stop treating it as moral failure and start treating it as design friction, as a mismatch between your equipment and your environment. The liberating realization is that your struggle isn't personal inadequacy. It's the predictable result of running Paleolithic neural architecture through an economic system optimized to extract maximum consumption from you. You're not broken. You're exactly what evolution designed. The problem is that what evolution designed doesn't fit what modern life requires. Recognizing this removes shame. Shame is the enemy of change. It activates defensive responses, denial, and avoidance. Shame makes you less likely to look at your bank account, less likely to seek help, less likely to try again after failure. Replace shame with curiosity. Why did I make that choice? What triggered it? What could I change in my environment to make a different choice easier next time? Treat yourself as a system to be understood rather than a moral agent to be judged. Practical first steps are small, specific, environmental. 1 automated transfer from checking to savings on payday. 1 expense audit, not to judge yourself, but to see patterns. 1 conversation with someone who manages money differently than you, not to compare, but to learn. 1 commitment device, 1 friction point, 1 nudge that makes the desired behavior slightly easier and the undesired behavior slightly harder. These aren't dramatic. They won't transform your life overnight, but they compound. Small changes in choice architecture produce large changes in outcomes over time, the same way small savings produce large wealth over time. Patience applies to behavior change as much as to investment returns. The meta lesson is that awareness itself is the first act of resistance. The system works best when it's invisible, when you don't realize you're being pushed, when the choices feel natural and free. Seeing the architecture makes you less susceptible to it. Not immune, but less susceptible. You'll still feel the dopamine pull of a sale. You'll still experience temporal discounting. You'll still have days where decision fatigue wins. But you'll recognize what's happening, and recognition creates a gap between stimulus and response where choice becomes possible. That gap is freedom. Not perfect freedom, not effortless freedom, but real freedom, earned through understanding, practiced through repetition, defended through environmental design. The game is rigged. The house has an edge. Your brain is mismatched to your economic environment, and powerful systems profit from that mismatch. But you can still choose how to play. You can learn the rules, redesign your environment, rewrite your story, and incrementally shift the odds. The brain is less like a machine and more like a garden, growing what it grew because those were the conditions that shaped it, but capable of cultivation, of intentional change, of producing new growth when the gardener understands what it needs. You inherited wild vegetables, survival traits from ancestors who faced different challenges. You can keep those vegetables, honor what they provided, and still plant new seeds, tend new growth, harvest new possibilities. Not against nature, but in collaboration with understanding it. Not through force, but through design. Not all at once, but day by day, choice by choice, until the new patterns become the automatic ones, until System 1 itself learns to serve the future you're building rather than the past you're escaping. That is sovereignty, not wealth, not power over others, but power over the one thing that ultimately determines your path forward. The gap between what you want and what you choose, made visible, made conscious, made yours.